recording. There we go. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the CIPP SIP events. We have these events every week. Sometimes there's a little bit of a gap in between when there's big MSP events that the Cyberdream team is at. But mostly we do these events for you. We talk about either SIP features or Microsoft features, and we try to explain exactly what's going on and what Microsoft is changing or what we're changing inside of SIP. We also try to have little spoilers on new features or new things that we're doing inside of SIP. And we always try to involve the audience as much as possible. So the last 10 minutes of this event is always reserved for just ask me anything. Ask me anything about SIP, ask me about our future, ask me about anything that we do at all. Go right ahead. You can even ask me about the color of my underwear, which happened last time. So some small things that I need to take care of first. Number one. We have a couple of recordings that are lagging behind. That is due to Ash, her computer breaking down, and we're not able to retrieve those recordings right now. We're working on fixing her computer, so we're making sure that those recordings come up as soon as possible. It's not that we're holding them hostage or anything, or it's not that we're lagging behind on purpose. It's just that they're on a machine that we currently can't access. So working on it, those recordings will be there soon. Currently, I'm recording myself. I'm hoping that I'm doing this right. If not, sorry guys. Ash and PC troubles have been a thing lately, I'm seeing in the chat. Yeah, that's true. Okay, let's get started, right? Today we're talking about GDAP. GDAP is complex still for a lot of MSPs. We're still seeing a lot of MSPs struggling specifically with the setup of GDAP and understanding all the moving parts. So this recording is a bit of a self-serving thing, right? It's an improvement, or at least I hope that I'm able to help you guys improve on what you understand about GDAP and how you utilize it for SIP. Because at the moment that I help you guys understand this more, there will be less chatter in either the community help or the at our help desk questions about GDAP. So let's get started. Let me explain first how we got here, because that is probably the biggest part of the story. Ages ago, long ago, in the far, far, far away history of M365, we had something called BPOS. Okay, we're not going that far back, but in actuality, Microsoft created something called DAP, Delegated Access Permissions. It allowed Microsoft partners, and I'm saying allowed because it's in the past, DAP allowed partners to connect to tenants that weren't their own to manage them. Great solution. Great solution because it allowed them access to all of their, it allowed MSPs, Tier 1 CSPs access to all of their clients. Biggest problem about that was that there were only two choices. You either had full global admin permissions or you had help desk admin permissions. And especially for us in the business of trying to apply least privilege in places, that wasn't really a solution, because it pretty much was, here everyone, have global admin permissions on all your tenants without any limitations. So Microsoft focused on making sure that we're going to manage this better. They started with having some more limitations in place for delegated access permissions. But everyone said, like, these limitations don't make sense. These limitations don't help us manage our clients. So Microsoft revisited the entire model and decided, you know what? We're going to implement a more granular method of accessing these tenants. And the granular methods allowed everyone to, or the more granular methods, I should say, allowed everyone to focus a lot more on specific use cases inside of M365. So with GDAP, the introduction of GDAP allowed you to manage just SharePoint instead of being a global administrator, or just Intune, or just specific parts. It allowed you to give very specific roles to users. Now, this is for MSPs. Microsoft gave you the freedom to do that. But most MSPs just decided, you know what, I still need global admin because I do everything for my clients. That's not true. That's not true, and I think that with SIP we've proven that you do not need global administrator access to your clients at all anymore. It's not the case. As long as you're managing your groups and environments correctly. And by correctly, I mean that you understand what each role does. It's the same thing as saying, I always need to be a domain administrator, even if all the tasks that you're executing is adding computers to a domain. You don't need to be a domain administrator for that. It's rethinking it a little bit. It's making sure that you are able to understand what task you need to do and what role is assigned to that specific task. And for a lot of MSPs, it's like, yeah, but if I have to think about each of these roles, as something that I do, I need every single role assigned. Well, you don't permanently need those assigned. You don't always need to do those tasks. I'm not going to go too deep into that today. Today, I'm going to explain to you all the moving parts around GDAP. I'm going to show you exactly how to create a GDAP relationship, both in the partner portal and in SIP. And I'm going to show you exactly how the entire linking between a relationship, the groups and roles, and eventually the last step of actually assigning those roles to a user works. All right, let's make sure that we get started on that. I'm going to share my screen. I first have to open my browser and make sure I'm logged into my development tenant, so give me a second for that. In the meantime, while I'm logging in and being woefully underprepared, because I could have done this right before the session, right? Tell me, everyone, what your experience has been with GDAP so far in the chat. Remember that if you have important questions you want to ask me or the team, just tag Ash or tag me directly so that I can check those answers. Okay, just a second, I'm MFAing somewhere. Yay, finally MFA'd. Okay, so I have some tags. Less trouble than everyone made it sound. I actually like that. I really like that. It's by Daniel, he just said, or Greybeard, sorry, Greybeard just said, like, it's less trouble than everyone made it sound. As long as you had a good understanding of what exactly was going to happen, yeah, it's less trouble. It helped so much, especially because right now we have so much more access than we used to. It's amazing. There's so many more places that we actually have access to that Microsoft seems to finally really be listening at what we need. A good example of that is security. Remember that you couldn't even access the security center before. Now you're able to access any part of the security center. You're able to deploy the standard Defender layout, the Defender first setup. You're able to do that now. Actually, you weren't able to manage everything in Exchange. You're now able to manage everything in Exchange. There's a lot of fun stuff like that. Okay, so another good thing to realize about GDAP, of course, is that GDAP relationships have a maximum timeout. That's a good thing. Instead of having all of your clients in your tenant forever without them knowing and without you realizing sometimes, it's actually really good that these relationships finally auto-expire, especially if you're no longer managing a tenant. Like, I think in my list at the moment of my GDAP migrations, we had like 50 clients that were no longer clients, but we couldn't remove the relationships because the reseller relationship had to be removed first. And like, there was a lot of complexity involved in removing clients from your partner center. And now they're finally able to just go away. Okay, all right, let me start sharing my screen and start talking about GDAP and how to manage relationships. Just a second. There we go. Better text readability, partner center. You guys should be able to see my browser now. And I'm just going to overlay my browser over the Discord thing so that the OBS records the browser too, and you guys don't have a low quality recording later on. All right, so here we go. Here we see some of our tenants. A very good starting point for this is that you have to understand there's two types of relationships. There is the customer list and the administrator list. The customer list is actually a list of reseller relationships you have with the client. That is not a GDAP permission. This just means you have access to their tenant to be their indirect reseller. That is all. And I think I saw some tags specifically about this, like, hey, how exactly does the reseller relationship compare to the relationship that you have with GDAP? They are two completely different things. Do not see them as one. This is actually no longer a hard requirement to do unless you have an application that is looking at the old list for tenants. For example, I think, there's a small list of applications, and actually one of our contributors has a blog about it, and I'm pretty sure I'll drop in the chat right now. There's a couple of reasons you still want to do this. Number one is if you have a tool that only checks the contracts list. That's what this is called. Number two is that if you have some form of indirect resellership that requires you to add the MSP ID or the MSSP ID to the Microsoft partner side. This is no longer required if you're trying to get rebates and these kind of things, because this is no longer reported that way. Rebates are now reported by the CSP directly, so by the person where you bought your licenses. I'm seeing some tags, so let me just switch screens for a second. Can SIP make those relationships when GDAP is created? No, we do not. We do not, kind of on purpose. I mean, you no longer need that relationship. I'm going to zoom in a little. I see that some people are asking like, hey, zoom. Let me make sure that you guys are able to see everything. So here we have a list of our GDAP relationships. And as you can see under administration, you immediately see that it's granular administration. This means that in these relationships, there's a different way of administrating them than through our old user relationships or our old DAP relationships. Now, in this list, we have a couple of relationships. Each relationship is a standalone thing. You can have as many as you want with a specific client. You can have one role per relationship per client if you want. That is an option. It's not an option I advise, but they all work cumulative. So if you have 5 roles in one relationship and 5 roles in the other relationship, and you assign all of the groups to your specific users, you have all 10 of those rules active. Now let's zoom in on a relationship right now, the only one that's active. Good point, good mention. Hold on, let's go back to the list. And it's the partner center, so it's slow. It's not SIP. I'm sorry guys, but I do want to show you how it works inside of the partner center and things to check. So going back to my tenant, which one did I try using? Hold on, administer. So slow guys, so slow. I think 01. We're just waiting for it. Okay, so in this list, you actually see a couple of names. SIP automatically generates a random GUID as the name. A good way to recognize some of the other relationships is if the relationship contains MLT, which stands for Microsoft-led transition, then it's only a Microsoft read-only type of deal. Microsoft has migrated people to GDAP if you haven't done anything for GDAP yourself. So that means that the moment that you have a GDAP relationship with a client and you didn't use any of the migration tools, you only have read-only access. MLT is read-only plus 2 or 3 write things. That's it. If you have a relationship that starts with LH, it means you migrated using Lighthouse. This means you might not have all the groups required for usage of SIP or other tools. Lighthouse only allowed you to migrate a very specific limited subset of rules. So you might be missing specific permissions and would need to add an extra GDAP relationship. If there's any type of other relationship name, you might have migrated using the bulk administration tool, and then you should have complete control over how your GDAP looks, because the bulk tool was pretty intense. Okay, looking at a relationship. When we click into a relationship, we're starting to go into the moving parts of it. So number one is you had an admin relationship. You have an admin relationship with your client, and inside of that admin relationship is a specific set of roles. Those roles are not assigned to anything yet. The roles you have are assigned to groups by using this interface or by using SIP itself. So the moment you click on add security groups, you're actually assigning a specific role to a specific group. Now this is where we are starting to get a little bit dangerous. Because the moment that you start assigning security groups, for example, let me click on the Dan was here group. Let me click on next, and let me click on all groups and at the same time hit save. There is a danger in this. There is a big danger in this. Assigning multiple groups or multiple roles to a single groups, you'll start having issues. You'll start having issues, especially around specific APIs not responding. Microsoft has updated their own documentation to say assign single groups to single environment or single groups to single roles. They've updated their documentation to say that explicitly. If you want to make sure that your groups are then combined, do that tenant side. So in most cases, you would only need about well, let's use the SIP default, which is 12 groups. You only need to create those 12 groups, assign them here, and then you can create a single group that contains those 12 groups as a nested group, and that resolves this. As long as you don't overassign stuff, you won't have issues. That's 100% for sure. The moments that you are saying like, I'm going to assign all roles and all groups to one thing, that is definitely then you will definitely see stuff breaking. The moment you assign, for example, I think it was license administrator, license reader, and like there's 4 or 5 license group. If you assign all of those, you're definitely going to see stuff breaking, stuff no longer working, all of these things. Assigning everything to one thing is going to break things. Exactly. We're seeing that in chat right now. People are saying that. Yeah, that will definitely break things. So you can have all 80 roles here, as long as you don't assign each role to a group. That's not going to work. That's going to be really painful. It's not going to be a fun experience. So again, recommendation by Microsoft itself, assign a single role to a single group. For example, let's say I have M365 GDAP application developer. I look for just this group and I just look for application developer. It's not currently in my list, but it's an example. You assign it to a single group and then you hit save. If you need to have all of those groups assigned to a single user, make sure you use a nested group inside of your own tenant. I'm seeing some questions and some talking inside of the chat. Let me just try to get to that as well. Yeah, exactly. Role-based groups, that's exactly what I was explaining in chat. Thank you, Greybeard, for trying to explain what I was saying, yeah. And of course, you can use privileged identity management to elevate to specific groups. That makes it really fun to make sure that like you create a global administrator group or a privileged authentication administrator group, and you only allow access to that when people are elevating using PIM or something like that. There's a couple of different ways to actually do that. One of the ways that I recommend is checking out MSP for MSPs, T-365's blogs. He has a couple of good blogs about that using explaining how to use that. Okay, so that's it. That's how you create a security or an admin relationship inside of the partner center. So first, you create a new relationship with the client. You request a new relationship. You set the link to the client. They click on it, and then you assign the groups to the specific roles. This part is very important. People tend to forget this because here, you've only assigned a role to a group. The next part is assigning that group to your user inside of your own Entra ID. So we're seeing here that I have the group M365 GDAP Application Administrator. So if I go to my Entra ID, let me just go to the Azure portal because I'm a bit lazy and that one was in my history. And I click on Entra ID. I could have, of course, gone to entra.cmd.ms. Thank you, Lewis. And I click on users, and I click on my test user, which is I have Kelvin SIP dev. And then we go to my assigned groups. And then we go and add a membership, and we're saying M365 GDAP Application Administrator. We hit select, and at that moment, it applies it, and it just, fixes or it allows me to use those permissions. It doesn't fix it, it allows me to use those permissions. Also, very important, assigned roles, you do not need to assign any roles here. This is permissions for inside of your own tenant. If you're giving your people global admin in your own tenant, stop doing that. Don't do that, please. Just don't. Don't assign stuff in the assigned roles section, just assign stuff in groups. Okay, so there was a question, what group do you need to be in for e-discovery reports and downloads? Exchange Administrator doesn't cover that. You need to be in privileged administrator, privileged role administrator, or in e-discovery administrator, or in security administrator, one of those three. You can select which one to find exactly which permissions do what. I'll drop a link in the chat in a little bit that has all of the specific permissions defined per role. Microsoft has a cool document about that you can just read and see specifically which one requires which permission. So that's the part on doing it through the admin portal. And that is, of course, it's a pretty poor experience, right? I mean, you guys saw how slow the partner portal was loading. I had to request a relationship. I had to click into the relationship. And then one by one, I had to assign those groups to the roles. That can be a bit much work, right? So let's try doing it through SIP now. Demo.sip.app. I'm actually not sure if this account has access to that environment. No, it does not. Well, that's a shame. That means I have to start my local dev environment. That's okay. So remember, guys, this is a dev environment. If you see anything break, it is most likely because, well, it's dev. It's the oldest of the oldest of the old, or the newest of the newest of the newest stuff. It doesn't have any of the safeguards that are in the current permissions, or in the current build, sorry. We're talking about permissions so much, I'm starting to repeat that word. Okay, so first, there was a question about how to use SIP to set the current auto extend. So what you can do is you can currently go to the GDAP relationship list, select all, actions, auto extend relationship. That way you automatically set up auto extend for all relationships that currently do not have it, as long as you do not have the company administrator role or the global admin role included. Global admin is a bit of a misnomer. The CA role, it's actually company administrator these days. Microsoft renamed stuff and decided let's not involve anyone on that. It's a bit of a stupid decision, but yeah, company administrator or company administrator or global administrator should not be included. Then you can hit the auto extend button. I think I zoomed in enough again for people to see. No? Yes? Okay. I can zoom in a little more. I cannot make my browser window wider because then it doesn't fit on the recording. Okay, so like I said, let's try using SIP now to make sure that we have an easier experience. So I'm selecting these roles. Let's actually start at the start, guys. Creating a GDAP relationship inside of SIP, first, to do anything, you must map your GDAP roles to the current roles. And when you do that, what it actually does is create these groups inside of your own tenants, or inside of your primary tenant. That means that the moment that you run the role wizard, which doesn't seem to work on my local development machine, of course, the moment that you run the role wizard, we make a mapping between what group we've created and what the group ID is. And then we're able, I hate it when this happens. Local development is always a thing. Yeah, so sorry guys. I hate these white screens. I'm waiting for it. I'll fix it in post, and then on the recording, it'll look perfect. It'll look so smooth. In any case, the roles need to be mapped to make sure that you are able to assign them to a group inside of SIP. And inside of SIP, we actually have a couple of standards that we apply for these groups. One of them being that we allow you to create a custom group suffix that is at the end of the group. Let me actually select just application administrator here as an example. If I add this, blah, it will create a new group called M365 GDAP application administrator, blah. And it does that so that you can even assign different permissions to different groups of people. For example, you only want specific tenants to have application administrator and other tenants not. You can only invite those tenants. And that allows you a lot more flexibility in creating a separation between permissions between tenants. So, removing this. In this case, we're selecting application administrator as just one role. SIP has very specific 12 roles. And those 12 roles are all you need for any day-to-day administration that does not include global administrator. Those 12 roles, I can assure you, bring you closest to global administrator without having it, and still allow you to auto-extend the relationship, and have these granular access permissions that you actually really do want to apply. Now imagine we've selected those 12 roles and we're clicking on next. Then it maps these, creates the groups inside of our own tenants. Now I'm selecting these groups to use in a GDAP relationship. The moment that you create this, you can actually have a selection of how many invites you want. For example, I want 50, or I want 99, or I just want one. I have new client, so I have one new client, just the 12 roles, hit next. Seeing that I actually have one or two more, that's probably because I was testing on my local development environment. The 12 roles in the documentation are the ones that are correct. Can we get a filter on that screen to only include the recommended roles? Yes, actually. There is a filter coming that was recently created by, I want to say Chris Ham, but I'm not entirely sure if it was him. But he recently made a pretty complex filter that we're going to implement into the system to allow you to only select the recommended roles by for SIP. Now, the reason why I'm selecting, and this might be an important one, the reason why we're selecting these specific roles is because of the way that SIP is going to connect to your tenants. We're selecting administrator access in a lot of places, such as Intune, device administrator, exchange administrator, and then we're also selecting two special roles, privileged authentication administrator and privileged role administrator. These two are required to make sure that we get the closest to global administrator as we can without actually having global administrator. The privileged role administrator access allows us to create specific GDAP permissions that only a global administrator would be allowed to create, normally speaking. So that's why these specific roles are selected. It's not that we're saying like we want to make sure we work through least privilege. And if anyone tells you you must have global administrator, or if any documentation by a client, by a vendor ever tells you you must have global administrator in your GDAP relationship, just say no. Just tell them they're wrong. I'm serious. Like there is zero need for a product to ever have global administrator to your clients. What can you not do with these permissions that you can do with global administrator? Good question. Chris Williams just asked this. Well, Chris, it's very simple. With these permissions, you can do almost anything because you're able to request the API permissions to do this. So the moment that I need to, for example, with these permissions, do something very intensive on the tenant. A good example is delete the customer tenant. Actually, yeah, Gary, good example. I can request the specific graph API permission for it and do it. There's one exception. Stuff that has to do with your on-premises environments is often still locked behind global administrator permissions. And that is because it simply looks for the name global administrator. It's a badly coded thing. That is one of the few things that you cannot manage with, or cannot manage through the API using SIP. Has the documentation been updated for? Yes, well, not really. The documentation has been the same for about 6 months, maybe longer. All you need is these rules and you should be able to access Security Center. I'm sure I've had issues viewing OneDrive information from a user was another question. Actually, Zentech, that is a very good thing that I also wanted to talk about. Because there are some things that you guys need to understand. DAP allowed you to do things, delegated access permissions, allowed you to do things you were never supposed to do. The Microsoft Partner Agreement explicitly says that as a partner, you are not allowed to access your client's data. And that is a very, very reasonable thing. Microsoft simply says you're not supposed to be messing around in your client's data. You're not supposed to be messing around in their OneDrive. Like, you should not have access to their files, which is compliance-wise and security-wise, they're absolutely right in this. The idea that with DAP you used to be able to access a client's files is insane. They could not log that someone has accessed their files or changed their contracts. What if a bad MSP, and I'm not saying that anyone in this audience is a bad MSP, but what if they decided, let me go in and edit the PDF that they signed with me to make it a 5-year contract instead of a 3-year contract the moment they're looking for it. That's what you used to be able to do. Imagine the legal repercussions of that, if that is found out. That is terrible, of course. I'm seeing people making jokes like, hey, take notes. A bad MSP could do very, very terrible things with DAP. So Microsoft has said, you should not have SharePoint access. You should not have OneDrive access. What's the best way to delete a customer relationship and get it removed from SIP? Removing the relationship is now very easy. You just go to the Partner Center and move the relationship state to terminate it. After that, you simply clear your tenant cache or wait a day and it should drop out of SIP automatically. Unless if you excluded it in SIP. Then you must remove the exclusion first and then clear the tenant cache. The hidden in re-enter role partner is likely the way that GoDaddy did their special MS stuff. Yes, actually that role is now completely deprecated, the partner tier support. Even if you try to include it in a GDAP relationship now, it is no longer working. It'll just say like, hey, the GDAP relationship won't be able to be created. Chris asked, does or will SIP have the ability to manage existing partner and reseller relationship? For example, hunt existing relationships that include DAP admin roles. Looking at you, GoDaddy. DAP no longer works. It might say it has delegated access permissions, but they are no longer able to utilize those permissions to access tenants anywhere. It is more of a legacy interface thing that they are able to use these permissions. We even had a contributor recently find a single DAP permission thing inside of his tenant. And yeah, it just didn't work. He couldn't do anything with it. So that's it. Feel secure in that DAP is really gone. It is completely removed. If you want to remove old reseller relationships, use the partner portal. That's my recommendation in that. Moving on. The moment that you submit this, it generates an invite for you. There will be 2 links that are generated inside of SIP. Number 1 is the invite URL. You open this invite URL under either a billing administrator or a global administrator on the tenant. A billing administrator is allowed to accept GDAP invites. That's a good thing to know in case that the client doesn't have GDAP or doesn't have global administrator permissions. The onboarding link is for you. It is an internal link that brings you to the specific, I actually just clicked on it to show you guys. It brings you to the specific page where you can start the tenant onboarding, and it should pre-select the filter for you if the relationship is in this list. And that means that it has one relationship there. You click on next and you can start the onboarding inside of SIP. It's just an ease of use link. You do not need to click that because every 3 hours, this also automatically occurs. It's just like helping you make sure that the onboarding is completed inside of SIP. It's a little bit of a speed tool, really. Also, this link also includes 2 extra options. You can map the groups to GDAP roles and you can add the SIP user to missing groups. in case you haven't set up your user all the way in the correct way. I'm still seeing some questions coming in. We have a reseller that has global administrator on our partner tenant. Does he also need permissions for tenants from our partner account? I'm not exactly sure what... I think you're asking DAP, if they have DAP permissions. They no longer have those permissions, so... And of course, don't let, exactly what David says, don't let a reseller have global administrator in your tenant. They don't need it. Okay, so that's how you create a GDAP invite inside of SIP. It's that simple. You go through, I'll show it one more time, just because I went through it, started answering questions in between. You go through by going to the GDAP, or the invite wizard. You click on the map GDAP rules to make them appear in this list. Then you select the 12 rules that SIP advises. Currently I have 15 because I was messing around in this environment, of course. You click on next, you click on the number of invites you want to generate, and you copy that specific invite that is generated for you. You send that link to a global administrator, or you open it as a global administrator yourself, and that is that part done. Next, you execute the onboarding link to make sure that SIP has complete access to that tenant. One thing that is forgotten most of all is if you go to SIP and you go to application settings, and you run the permissions check, you click on the details button, this specific user needs to be in those groups generated by SIP. If you forget that, then you do not have access using SIP. Without this, you will not be able to use SIP to manage your tenants. You'll notice that by clicking, I think I have one broken tenant in this list. You'll notice that by clicking on the refresh button, the CPV refresh button on a broken tenant. And it should say something like, hey, we cannot access this tenant, or we don't have GDAP permissions, or for a free access denied, or something like that. I'm just waiting to see the results because I'm not exactly sure what the error message was anymore. It might be that this tenant is now working and that I'm doing this for nothing. An Eli 5 for CPV. Of course, yeah, this tenant was already fixed. So CPV stands for Control Panel Vendor, and it means it's a special API that people or developers like the people that create SIP or other panels can use to create a service principal inside the client tenant if they have the correct permissions. That is the easiest way to describe CPV. And